Okay, we're live.
Okay. All right, I'd like to welcome everyone out to the Planning Commission meeting for June 3rd, 2020, the Planning Commission of North Ogden City. I'm Vice Chairman Mason. I'll be standing in for Chairman Thomas this evening. We're going to begin our meeting as always with a quick invocation, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Barker. And I've been tasked today to give the invocation, which I will do right now. Our Father in heaven, as we meet this day to discuss the business of the city, we ask for understanding to be with us. We ask for understanding for those in our city, for those who are not in our city and our country, that we can understand one another from our various backgrounds, that we can have a spirit of tolerance and unity and find those things which bind us together. And we ask for this in thy Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
If you have a flag, welcome to participate in Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner Barker. By way of roll call, I note that, as noted earlier, Chairman Thomas is absent. As I scan through, I believe the rest of the Planning Commission is present. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the minutes consideration. By way of note also, this meeting is going to be quite lengthy, I believe. I looked at the supporting document. We're 166 pages of documentation. It's going to be quite lengthy, and I would just encourage, again, if anyone has comments to make, please make them. Feel free. We are definitely interested in hearing everyone's comments. If your comments can be summarized by an agreement by the prior person, for example, please try to do that as best as possible. We understand that not everyone is going to agree completely with the person in front of them, but that could speed things along a little bit. That will be discussed in the meeting, in the reading of the opening meeting statement, which will be to follow. But first on our roll was consideration for minutes of our last meeting. Have all had a chance to review those? I would entertain a motion for approval.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes for May 20th.
Okay. Commissioner Wade has motioned that we approve those minutes. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Commissioner Scott. Okay, all in favor to approve the minutes for the May 20th Planning Commission meeting, please give a voice vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Now we're going to hear from Mr. Rob Scott, city employee, that will outline some of the meeting parameters for those in attendance for maybe the first time.
Thank you, Chair, and those attending the meeting. I'm going to explain the process that the Planning Commission will use in making decisions and the rules that govern the agenda items or hearings. The Planning Commission is interested in receiving public input and treating everyone fairly, both interested parties and applicants. The Planning Commission is governed by Utah state law and the North Ogden City zoning and subdivision regulations. These codes contain criteria that the Planning Commission must follow in making its decisions. Before each agenda item begins, city staff will give a report. The report will identify whether the item is an administrative or legislative item and list the criteria that govern the city's decision. After the staff report, the item will be opened for other speakers. The applicant will speak first. Following the applicant, any other interested person will be allowed to speak, and the applicant has final rebuttal time. Applicants or their agents will be allowed up to 10 minutes for their initial presentation and 5 minutes for rebuttal. Persons speaking for a committee and or board will be given 5 minutes. All their individuals will be entitled to 3 minutes. Prior to speaking, anyone who needs more time to present evidence must ask for more time. Any information, argument, or evidence you give must relate to the criteria listed in the staff report or other criteria in the general plan or land use regulations that you believe apply to the decision. Any materials that are submitted anything submit, sorry, let's try that again. Any materials that are displayed or referenced must be submitted to the commission to be included with the record. All those attending the meeting should signify by raising the hand to be recognized. Anyone wishing to speak will state their name and address. The Planning Commission has adopted rules regarding outside contacts, otherwise known as ex parte communications. Commissioners are not to engage in communications outside of the public meeting regarding administrative applications. If you desire to speak to commissioners on these matters, it should be done at regular meetings so your comments, concerns, and evidence are on the public record. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose for items on our agenda tonight? I have none, but now is your opportunity to disclose anything. Okay, moving right along, we're going to open it up for public comments. These are public comments intended for items which are not on the agenda. If you do have comments to make about a specific agenda item tonight, we ask that you save it and reserve it for that time when that item comes forth. But if there are any comments from the public, general kind of comments, we entertain those now. We'll give just a moment for someone to raise their hand on the Zoom chat to be called on.
I don't see any raised hands.
Okay.
Looks like everybody.
Okay, and we recognize the difficulties with the Zoom meeting and appreciate the public's patience with this interesting format for a public meeting. Okay, so moving right along, we're going to hit our administrative items. That's item number 6 on our agenda. That's consideration and action regarding a final approval for the Towns at Patriot Point Phase 1, located approximately 150 East, 2300 North. And that will be presented by Brandon Bell. Brandon, it's your time. And you're muted, Brandon. We can't hear you.
Okay, thanks. I should be unmuted now. Appreciate the opportunity to present. Just one second. I've got to pull up the right file now. Okay, so as Chairman Mason mentioned, this is the Towns at Patriot Point subdivision. This is one phase of the project, which I think the overall site project is about 35 acres approximately. This project is about 5.3 acres itself, this phase of the project. And there are, the overall density of the project as a whole is 11.8 units. And recently, I think it was in late February, March, there was a 2-lot subdivision that was recorded to prepare the ground to be developed with buildings approved to be built on the property. That having been recorded, this proposed subdivision phase is for the first phase of townhomes in the project, and it includes 10 townhome buildings numbered 101 through 110. There's no minimum lot size for these lots. The proposed, I don't have an exact number on the count of the actual townhome units. I believe it's about 50. There's no minimum lot size for the lots that these are on. Rather, for this subdivision being part of the MPC zone, the lots are a result of the approved site plan. The proposed lots for this subdivision are the same basic configuration as the site plan that was approved as part of the development agreement. And there have been minor adjustments to road location to allow for a concrete apron transitioning from the street to the garages. There's one of the streets that goes through this subdivision is 150 East. That right of way needs to have a 6-foot sidewalk on the east side of it. A trail is required along both 150 East and 2300 North per the trails master plan that's part of our general plan. And these trails need to be 6-foot wide walking paths to meet the parks and recreation requirements for the submitted street cross section. And again, one of those is to be located along 150 East, and the other is to be located along 2300 North. On the portion of 2300 North that's east of 150 East. On a related note, the striping in the right-of-way along 150 East will need to be done by the applicant and include parking on one side and bike lanes on both sides as specified in the design of the right-of-way shown in the improvement drawings that have been provided to our city engineer, Lauren Gardner. Approval of the building locations will occur as part of the building permits and will be based on the locations shown on the approved site plan. Building locations approved as part of a building permit will be required to meet the locations shown on that approved site plan. And then the applicant should also be aware that if the property owner ever wants to sell off individual townhomes, they will need to do another subdivision and possibly a condominium process. At present, the way it's set up currently, these are for rent and they're have multiple buildings on a single lot, and that would need to change as part of either another subdivision or condominium process in the future were that to occur. And then finally, there's one item regarding the dedication statement on the plat. Staff recommends that as a condition of approval that staff be permitted to research and work with the applicant to finalize that dedication statement based on the ownership of the property. The dedication may need to be amended to address whether or not 2300 North should be included in that dedication statement. So for every plat that we do, there's a dedication statement of what property is being dedicated to the city for right-of-ways and other public purposes. And in this case, staff just needs to research whether 2300 should be included as part of that dedication for this plat. And so those are our three recommended conditions of approval are that approval of building location occur as part of the building permits and that building and be based on the approved site plan. The buildings must meet the location shown on the approved site plan. The issue about striping that was already mentioned, and then this final issue that I just mentioned regarding the dedication statement being finalized after research from staff about whether to include 2300 North or not in that. It's a relatively simple subdivision since we're not dealing with the typical lot sizes and things like that, and it's already been mostly predefined by the site plan. Are there any questions that the commission has for myself?
Yeah, Brandon, I just had a question on the note on the general plan in the staff report. It said that this is located in the Southtown neighborhood. Is that really being considered in the Southtown neighborhood?
No, I'm sorry. That is an error. That was an error on my part.
Okay. I kind of thought it might be, and I don't know if it needs to be corrected or not. I didn't figure it was a big deal, but I just thought I'd mention it.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that to my attention, but that is an error.
Brandon, in the included items that were in the packet, they have minutes from a previous meeting, and in those minutes there was some discussion, and I recall these because I was involved in them, about a lot that the rear or the front of one lot would face the rear of another lot. In other words, they would be instead of kind of back to back, they'd be front to back. I don't see that in the renderings that are given to us. Was something changed there, or do you recall that? What the concern was there?
The subdivision?
It references it in the I can find it in the meeting minutes from the prior approval. That was a
Brandon, I think that was when we were talking on the whole concept of the project there, and it's in a later phase that would occur.
okay.
I do know that whatever concern was had with that, this subdivision is based on the approved site plan. So that concern was addressed as part of the site plan, whether it was the city council decided the configuration or not is and the site plan was approved with that site plan on the issue.
Brandon, we're getting a little it's tough to
was
understand.
already been like the final solution reflected in that the city council was okay with, should be reflected in this subdivision.
Okay, was everyone clear on what
Does
Brandon?
that make sense? Am I explaining that
Well,
clearly?
we're having some technical difficulties with your audio. It was cutting in and out. I do think the gist of what you were saying was any concerns that were raised at that point were cleared up between us and the city council, and preliminary approval was given. I think that's what you were trying to convey.
Hey,
Sorry.
Yeah. The other thing, Brandon Mason, yeah, as Commissioner Lunt said, this phase does not have the problem with where you've got where it's back facing front or anything. That's going to be on the very west side of the development. I found the site plan, and yeah, we're a long ways away from that yet.
Okay, but I just wanted to make sure we touched on that, just because if approval is granted tonight and we set this thing up so that becomes an issue in a later phase, then we've probably not done our due diligence there. I don't see it myself. I reviewed this and I don't see that as a concern personally. I was just hoping for maybe some light to be shed on that, because it was definitely discussed.
Can you hear me now?
Commissioner Mason, it was like Commissioner Lunt mentioned, it was the phase that builds out on the northwest section. And really what it does is it faces the backside of some existing townhomes in a different development. But it's a later phase.
Okay. So nothing with the construction of this phase would impact that, we believe. I'm of that opinion.
I think so as well.
Okay. Okay, do we have any further questions for Brandon? Okay, do we have any public comments on this issue, on this item? Any comments from those attending?
I don't see any hands raised.
Give them just a second to figure that out if they want to make a comment. Okay, with the lack of any, is the applicant himself here to make a comment? I don't see them.
He is,
He is? Okay.
yes.
Sir or ma'am, would you like to address us? Or we do have a raised hand.
Yeah, that's Geneva, just a moment. Okay, Geneva, can you hear us?
Yes, John, go ahead.
Yes, I think the
We're gonna need your name and address, especially where it's a remote meeting.
1165 West, 4000 North in Pleasant View. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, this phase one will be the beginning. There'll be 58 lots in there, and there won't be any problems of what you discussed, Brandon, about different buildings facing the fronts of others. That doesn't come until phase, I think it's 4 or 5. And so I think that the site plan that is presented before the Planning Commission is the one that we've really worked hard to get approved by Lauren and our engineer and John Call and the city. And it's quite a group effort really to pull all this together, not just the subdivision, but the overall 39 acres. So we appreciate your considering this for final approval and would like to move ahead. Thank you. Any questions for me?
I have none, Commission. Is there any questions for the applicant? Okay, is there any further discussion? Any further thoughts, concerns, comments about this from the Planning Commission? In the absence of further discussion, I'd entertain a motion, which we can still build our discussion on that.
I'll make a motion that we grant final approval of the Patriot Point subdivision phase 1, subject to the recommended conditions in the staff report, the city engineer's review memo, development agreement, and the technical review committee notes.
Second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for positive approval of this item to the, for the development of Patriot Point. I'm sorry, I'm alt tabbing like crazy here. Is there any further discussion before we vote on this item? Okay. I would call for a vote then on this item. We're going to start with Commissioner Nancaro. How would you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt,
Yes.
Commissioner Waite,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
Commissioner Arner,
Yes.
and I vote yes. The motion passes unanimously. That moves us on to item 7, which is consideration or action regarding preliminary approval for the Pheasant Landing subdivision, which is a 19-lot subdivision. And we are going to ask Mr. Rob Scott to present us with that.
Commissioners and audience, what's before the Planning Commission this evening is preliminary approval for the Pheasant Landing subdivision. It's located off of East Alberta Drive, approximately 175 East. The zoning is R1 12.5. There's a little over 8 acres in the project. This was going to be on your last Planning Commission agenda. However, the applicant was working with the city to look at other options for the relationship of the existing utilities that are along the west boundary line of this property. And so the applicant requested that that evening that it be tabled, which it was. So let me just give a little bit of a background on this. The property is currently vacant and is in the R1 12.5 zone. The R1 12.5 zone requires a minimum lot size of 12,500 square feet for interior lots and 13,500 square feet for corner lots. The frontage requirement is 100. I've got square feet and it should be lineal feet. This particular project had a technical review meeting on April 9th, and the city engineer submitted a report on May 26th. We've received will serve letters for secondary water, and a geotechnical report for the subdivision's been submitted. The applicant has investigated 5 design options for this subdivision. As I mentioned, they discovered that there's a sanitary sewer line and storm drain lines that run along the west boundary of the proposal. It's been city policy that utility lines be located within a public street in order to provide easy maintenance access. However, this is an existing line and therefore deserves some alternative consideration. The city has also allowed for utility lines to be placed within trail locations. The applicant has been negotiating with city leadership as to whether the city will participate in the relocation cost of these lines. I don't have a report for you relative to that negotiation. The applicant can probably share what's taken place relative to that. So the applicant provided 5 alternatives to take a look at the various design options. And the applicant, at least earlier, he can speak to this, was a preference for either option 1 or 2. And who knows, that it may have changed in the meantime. But let me briefly describe each of the options and the staff comment associated with each one of those. So the option 1 would be that the existing utilities would remain along the west boundary of the subdivision to the south boundary of lot 14. So approximately, maybe a third of the way going south. And then there would be there would then, the utilities would then go east to the new street within an easement. There would be no stub road to the west in this scenario. And you'll note that the detention basins location changes depending on the option as well. So our staff comment on this one is that the easement will impact the location of any proposed fencing between lot 14 and 15. And an additional option is to put in a pedestrian pathway over the easement is one option, another option or sub option. Option 2, all utilities are relocated along Alberta Drive, so that's on the north side, and into the new stub street. So all of the utilities would then become located in the public street. No stub street is proposed with this option. The detention pond is along Loman View. The staff comment is this is the best alternative for future utility maintenance. However, it does not provide the connectivity to the properties to the west. Option number 3, the existing utilities remain in the existing location and an easement is provided between lots 14 and 15 for maintenance access. Again, there's no stub street. The detention pond is along Loman View. Our comment to this option is that provides access for manhole maintenance, but is the least desirable if there is ever a need for these lines to be replaced. The easement will impact the location of any proposed fencing between lots 14 and 15 and additional options to put in a pedestrian pathway over the easement. Option 4, the existing utilities remain in the existing location with a 38-foot stub street to the west. The detention pond is shifted to the west. Staff comment options 4 and 5 are staff's preferred option as they provide connectivity for both residents and emergency responders. Option 5 is the same as option 1, except with the stub street. The detention pond is shifted to the west. So same comment as I just read as far as options 4 and 5. Let me identify that obviously we're governed by city ordinances regarding the ability to require a stub street or require some type of a pedestrian walkway to the west. I've given you a number of our ordinances that relate to that particular topic. Later on in the agenda, I'm going to suggest some alternative language that will strengthen our ability to have these stub streets and or pedestrian walkways installed. There does not appear to be a clear standard currently for requiring a stub to the west. However, a stub road is recommended as identified in the city engineer's report. And we believe this is an important feature for providing connectivity between residents and providing emergency access. Staff recommends that if any of the options chosen include utility lines between lot 14 and 15, then the pathway should be built upon the easement with sufficient width as required by the city engineer. Now, as I also noted, this is definitely going to impact fencing options for those 2 lots. So I'm not going to go through every one of these standards that I've put in the report. I've underlined certain ones that I thought are most appropriate. Let me just go to the bottom of page, what is it? Bottom page 3, our block length standard. The lengths, widths, and shapes of blocks shall be such as are appropriate for the locality and type of development contemplated. Block lengths are not to exceed 1,320 feet, nor less than 400 feet in length. And then the last one is at the top of the next page. In long blocks, pedestrians or crosswalks not less than 6 feet wide may be required by the Planning Commission through the center of blocks more than 800 feet long. where deemed essential to provide circulation or access to schools, playgrounds, shopping centers, transportation, or other community facilities. Blocks designated for industrial uses, and I won't read that. So again, that particular standard, if the Planning Commission feels like the phrase other transportation, which means that the future right-of-way there, then our feeling is that some sort of connectivity to the west should be included. Then there's some kind of housekeeping things that are included in the report. In terms of the lot design, the frontage, lots meet the required square footage for the zone. We do require that a verification for lot widths be submitted to staff for review. In terms of, maybe you can go to the, just one of the designs of the subdivision, Lynn. Doesn't matter which one. Just scroll down.
Is that what you mean?
Keep going. I want to see it, the subdivision plat.
Oh, it's not connected. Just a sec.
So maybe you can just scroll in into on the northeast corner.
I was sure having a hard time navigating these documents online. I found it was better to download them and open them locally, not with a web browser.
Okay, go to the top now. I'm sorry, just go scroll the other way. So we can see, there we go, right there. So between lot 10 and the parcel, the Lindstrom family parcel, there's going to be an adjustment there. And there's two options to occur. Staff's feeling is that when that transfer of that one parcel takes place, instead of having a remainder parcel, that either needs to be included within lot 10 or it needs to be included within the Lindstrom property. And our feeling is that it should just, the Lindstrom property just should become a lot within the subdivision. That would clean everything up. So I've talked to the applicant about this. So he can share with what he would like to do at this point relative to that. Let's see, in our previous conversations, they said they were going to be putting improvements along the front of that parcel in any case. So it shouldn't really make much of a difference there. Again, let's see, I think I mentioned already that we've got copies of the will serve letter from, oh, this one talks about Central Weaver Sewer. We have that one, secondary education, irrigation, the geotechnical report. We have a standard for when we do have these geotechnical reports that they're noted on the plat so people can reference them. And note that stormwater detention is being handled by the detention basin on the south side of the subdivision. Just a couple other comments. The traffic study that was addressed for this particular subdivision, we've attached that. You'll recall that was given as when that rezone petition came forward. So any required, and lastly, any required utility easements need to be identified as approved by the city engineer. So that's a lot of a mouthful when you've got 5 options to consider. In terms of the summary here, the question is, which does the proposed subdivision meet the requirements of the subdivision and zoning ordinance? Second question is, which of the design options is preferred? And is the proposed subdivision consistent with the general plan? This particular neighborhood is in the Old Town neighborhood. And the general plan calls for this area to be developed as a low density residential. So I've got quite a list of recommended conditions of approval. If you want me to, I'll read through every one of those, but I think I've talked about each one. You're probably tired of me talking at this
Is that
point.
something you could give us in a list real quick? And we could reference
it's right there at the bottom of the report, recommended conditions. So, and she's got it on the screen. So do you want me to read them?
Let me look. Commission, would you like them read? Are we okay? Sounds like we're okay with that.
Okay, so let me just give our staff recommendation. We recommend the Planning Commission grant preliminary approval for either option 4 or 5 for the Pheasant Landing subdivision. If an option is chosen with an easement to the west, in other words, other than options 4 or 5, then staff recommends that a pedestrian walkway be included. Additionally, that preliminary approval be granted subject to the conditions recommended in this staff report, the engineer's report, and the technical review committee letter. So with that, commissioners, I'm happy to try to answer questions.
I just had a comment. I was reading through the options. What jumped out at me was option 4 and 5, the safety issue. I think safety weighs in big. But I also remember one time we had a subdivision, we talked about these easements for utilities, and now we kind of went along the fact that safety outweighed anything else. I could do 4 or 5 and not have a problem.
Mr. Barker, can you elaborate on the safety concern?
The emergency vehicles being accessed in and out, how far people had to travel, it just would make it easier to get in and out if there's an emergency, either for fire trucks, for ambulances, or whatever. Does that help out, Brandon?
Yeah, thank you.
Uh-huh.
We're not in the discussion point. I'll give my thoughts on that when we get there.
I just have one question, Mr. Scott. Without the substreet, how long is the block length? Is it over 800 feet?
It's the block length is approximately 1,150 feet.
Okay, so like Commissioner Barker said, the access point for emergency vehicles, you probably need to look at one of the options with the substreet in it, which I guess would be 4 or 5.
My main question is, when we're looking at options 4 or 5, is what the value is really of 5 versus 4, or other way. I don't really understand because I'm not an engineer.
Had the same thought.
Mr. Scott, could you address that? What the difference is between 4 and 5?
Yeah. Yes. Option 4 is the utilities would not be relocated all into the new street. They would remain along the west boundary line. And then option 5, then it's the same as option 1. The utility lines would remain on the west side till the south end of lot 14, and then would extend east to the new street.
I did have a question. Option 1 is there a problem having the pedestrian walkway pathway over top of the utilities a problem?
We've done that in the past, and it seems to have worked fine. The city engineer and the Parks Department, they've worked in a number of instances where that's been a success. So is Lauren on with us, Len?
He is.
So I don't know if you want to ask Lauren to comment on that.
Lauren?
Yeah, but I kind of I don't that's one of the options you didn't really prefer because of the pedestrian walkway over top of the utilities. And I figured if you can access them, I don't see a big problem.
you want some comment from me?
Yes, I do.
We have approved a similar project, Northwood Hills subdivision, where we have that a sewer line going down the easement. It's actually on the city property, but it has a trail right over top of it also. That's common in a lot of locations. We do require that the access to our sewer manholes that are going to be within this easement or the roadway have a paved maintenance road up to it, which will also double as a trail. So if you've got any other questions, I can answer those too.
I would kind of like to hear the applicant address this and see what his preferences are.
Well, I think he stated that his preference was 1 or 2. I would like to know why, what the compelling reasons there. If there are no more questions for Mr. Scott, we can turn the time over to the applicant. Do we have any additional questions about the presentation?
No, I'd like to hear about 1 and 2 as well.
Okay. Would the applicant care to address us on this?
Yeah, this is John Hanson, 1165 West, 4000 North in Pleasant View. The reason I did 5 layouts was to look at every possibility for this piece of property. It's irregularly shaped. And one of my concerns has always been that the utilities down the west side are not within your utility easement. But one of the real problems we've had is down on lot 19. Even though we show that as an option on, what is it, 4 and 5, a retention basin probably cannot be put there with your utilities almost 15 feet out of your easement to go with the slope that the city requires for a retention basin. So that was drawn up before we had all the information on that. I'll get to why I went with 1 and 2. We're trying to keep the retention basin on the lowest part of the property, which would be lot 2 on option 4. That's our goal. And we also want to have 19 be a buildable lot. And we haven't discussed 3. We can't, if we did option 3, we could not even use that as a buildable lot on option 3. So that's gone, and I maybe shouldn't have shown or given Rob everything we'd been thinking about. But as I've gone over this, the reason I think the best option for the city and the subdivision is option 2. That's the most expensive option that I have on the table. As Rob said, I've requested maybe some participation from the city in helping reline all the utilities. I was thinking maybe a 30-70 split, and that would put everything down the public roads and really solve your problem down at the bottom where they went outside your easement so many years ago that really affects lot 19. So to me, the best solution is option 2. That's more expensive, but there's no need of just moving the utilities from 16 to 19. We should move them all the way down. Concerning the length of this block and the stub road, the ordinance, as Rob said, is 1,320 feet a maximum block. We are 1,152 feet. We are within the ordinance for a single block. Now, the stub road to the west is I've done these developments, and I have stubbed roads into properties that did not have access to utilities or didn't have any other access to their property. That's, that's just common courtesy and good planning to do that. In this case, the Bailey property to the west, they have 1,276 feet from north to south, which is within the maximum block. They have plenty of frontage on Alberta and Loman View for their utilities to go there. And so, my feeling is I'm within the ordinance. Yeah, we all think, well, it'd be good if we went over and saw the neighbor and that, but we're only talking 400 feet around the block with my trails and that, to access the road. I don't know about safety, is that, everyone wants to say we all want to be safe, and we do. I don't know what that adds to the safety. Eventually there'll be another road up through Bailey's that's going to be what, 300 or 400 feet from this road. So that, I just think the best option for the city is option 2. And that would be my proposal, to get everything out of those, the public utilities. And why do we want to create another intersection between 14 and 15? A lot of times these stub roads just turn into be trailer storage. I don't know if you've looked around, but the people in lot 14 and 15, they like to park their trailers, their boats, and what else they can accumulate on that free road.
Mr. Hanson, sorry to cut you off. I had a question while I was thinking of it. So you mentioned the property to the west that they would have, and I'm trying to think future development here.
Yeah, I have not laid it out, but they're within the distance of the block of the city ordinance. They have access to frontage. Oh, excuse me, Brandon.
Well, I'm just wondering, does that, okay, so I see where I'm on Google Earth here, and I'm looking down at the property that we're discussing. And I do notice that as Alberta goes, as these two streets go west, Alberta starts to bank north, and Loman View kind of carries on straight, meaning the two properties, if you can see my hands, are kind of diverging further and further. I wonder if you've done the math for that furthest point. Or where do you, when you measured that, was that, how am I trying to say this?
Well,
Does that include your road you're proposing and one more road to the west, which would be within the 1,300 feet?
Yeah, they're there.
My engineer went right down the center of that to come up with that distance. We can easily verify that.
Yeah, well, it passes the eyeball test for sure. I was just wondering how many subdivisions would fit to the west of you, and I think that would just be one.
Yeah, there's just one there, and then the rest of it's built out. The other thing, is I noticed you just approved a subdivision over in North Ogden. What is it? Norwood?
Northwood.
Northwood. And they didn't even pay any attention to the north stub road that was left. It didn't fit with their plan. And when I did Legacy, I had the same thing in phase 1. There's a stub road there, but it didn't maximize or work for the community to have another road coming in there. So, I understand what Rob and Brandon are saying, and Lauren, but I think that the stub road, I'd rather put the money into the utilities to get it right the first time. And that's really why I'm pushing for option 2. So that's my speech on it. If they didn't have access, the Baileys, I'd say no problem. Let's stub them a road. If they didn't have water, yeah, let's run them the water. And let's run them the sewer. Let's run them everything so they can develop their property, but they don't need it.
It's in line with 150.
So I don't know what else. I mean, you guys, that I think that at least that's my speech. As far as we need. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, given that we've heard from the applicant, we would entertain public comments on this matter. We have a raised hand.
We do. Blake Welling, will you give your name and address?
Yeah, Blake Welling, 1098 East, 3100 North in North Ogden. As I've looked at these different options, to me, option 1 or 2 makes the most sense. I don't see a safety benefit on having a stub road. There's already 2 main roads that provide access to this subdivision. Additionally, you're talking about visiting the neighbors. Well, we don't really need to encourage driving around the block to do that. You could get the same thing either by going to one of the 2 main roads or by having a trail through there. I would agree with the developer that, maybe that stub road will get continued, maybe not. And then you just have junk that sits there. I do have a couple questions, just like with the general process with all this. So if it gets approved tonight, does this go on to city council or does it become available for purchase? Like, how does that work? Other question is, who is in charge of the maintenance of that detention basin? Or is that just going to become overgrown with weeds in a couple of years?
Thank you for your comment, Mr. Welling. In regards to the process, I talked to that a little bit. So the applicants put in for preliminary approval, which basically, to use layman's terms, kind of gives him a nod that, hey, we're in support of this. It allows him to, it gives him the confidence to go out and possibly spend more money towards the development of it. As he gets it more refined, it'll come in for final approval. And where it is not a subdivision or where it is not a new zoning request, I'm trying to think, I do not believe it goes to the city council. That's our job as the land use authority here to approve that. But there is further process with this. This is a preliminary approval request. Did I get that right, staff?
So maybe, is John with us, Lynn?
Yes.
Look at him first. I didn't see him.
So I think maybe John could make a comment about the relationship of the negotiation with the pending negotiation with the city council.
Mr. Collins.
So,
Thanks.
yeah, so for the, with the city council, any money contribution from the city would be approved by the council, including what the developer's talking with that 70-30 split. As far as maintenance for the basin, that would be handled by the storm drain service in the city, which is stormwater does the several basins around the city, and they would take on more. It does end up resulting eventually in some increase or the potential for increased fees if we get lots of these little basins around the city, but that's who manages them.
Mr. Call, can you give us an idea of the city council's appetite for an agreement like that? I mean, we obviously have no ability to authorize, funds or anything like that, but assuming that we hypothetically put option 2 as an option there as our preference, is that something that the city council would entertain? Do you have a gut feel on that?
I don't have a gut feel. That the council has done upgrades to lines in the past, but I'm not aware of them moving a line like this in the past. So it would be kind of be new ground for them, and I'm not sure whether they would be okay with the amount or not. I think this is just a preliminary approval, so you could give preliminary approval based on that as a condition, and if the council turns it down, then we'd have to come back and have another approval since that was one of the conditions.
Thank you. My thoughts on that, council or commission, is that that's for the city council to decide the expenditures and things. I think we make a decision based on the best layout for the city, for the residents that will live there, for the neighbors, and we let the city council come up with the hard decisions of whether that's a financial in their best financial interest. That's my take on that. Thank you for your comment, Mr. Welling. Do we have any other public comments about this?
No.
And then, okay, with the lack of public comment, turn it over for a recommendation from the Planning Commission, followed by discussion. Or do we want to have a quick discussion before we call for a recommendation?
I think we need to have a discussion about the options.
Sure.
You know, I believe that the reason that the staff recommended option 4 or 5 was because of the future connectivity issue with that stub road. We have in the past been pretty, I guess you'd say, strict or regulated about breaking up that block, that length of a block, with some kind of a stub road for pedestrian walkway or something for future connectivity. And that's clearly outlined in the general plan. So I think we really should take a hard look at option 4 or 5, because the first 3 options do not include a stub road at all. So I guess that's my 2 cents, that I would prefer that we stick with the 4 or 5, just because of, I think it would be short-sighted of us not to think about future development.
Good points. Thank you for sharing. I have a different perspective on that. I believe the stub road in this situation almost stubs to nowhere. I believe it stubs to one other potential development to the west, which will almost certainly become a development. But I don't necessarily think the extra blacktop justifies it. I think if we wanted a good feel of how that would exist without a stub road, one could drive down 150 West there. And that is almost exactly the length of road that it's going to be. I've driven down that before. I didn't find it offensively long. It was almost, a pleasing experience for me. So I don't necessarily buy into the stub road myself. I understand where staff's coming from. I just don't see the safety benefits of a fire truck driving an additional 4 houses to get to Alberta or Lomanview being a compelling factor there, given that Alberta and Lomanview are fairly major arterial roads, and I know that's not the right definition. So those are my thoughts.
As I listen to him talk and both of you talk, yeah, I have this thing, if there's no need for a stub road because it'll never be used for any future development, I can see why option 1 and 2 are appealing. If that stub road's ever going to be used, and I'd have to go 4 or 5, that leaves me up in the air. If the stub road's never going to be used, put a pathway in.
Well, I think our job is to.
I'm confused whether stub road will ever be used.
Well, my thought on that, Commissioner Barker, is that it would be used. It wouldn't be a complete, it initially would be exactly as Mr. Hansen described, a place for people to park boats and maybe put a trampoline that would be a little road next to their home. It makes 2 corner lots there, but it would eventually, if we put on our future glasses and look at what is going to come in the future, I'm fairly convinced myself there'll be a development to the west. And that development would have to meet that stub road in another road. And so you'd have basically 4 blocks instead of 2 blocks.
Right, because I'm like you. I look at the map, and I don't see the safety thing as being an issue anymore. It's more or less, will stub road, yes or no?
Are there other thoughts? I welcome any thoughts, whether they agree with us or whether they don't. Obviously, we have 2 different opinions here already stated.
Yeah, I mean, a 4 lot block, which I guess if it gets stubbed through and they actually do the Bailey property, it's an 8 lot block. That's a really small block. And so, yeah, it does concern me that maybe we're chopping things up a little too much. Done in the name, and so I don't feel real strongly that it's a safety issue.
If anybody has Google Maps around them, or can even just imagine these lines, if you take the same roads as you go over into Pleasant View, there are some really long, awkward streets as you come up Alberta Drive. And, on the one hand, I don't think we want to create that situation. And I'm talking about to be specific here, 700 West, 750 West in Pleasant View, and 550 West in Pleasant View. As you come off Alberta Drive and go south, there's some really long streets there. I don't necessarily see it as a safety issue, but I think it does limit the neighborhood connectivity, right? I mean, I think what city staff and what the general plan is trying to convey is an ability for kids to walk around and get to the neighbor's house. They throw a ball over the fence. They don't have to walk 3/4 of a mile to go around to the neighbor's house to come in and get that ball. Things like that. So definitely a trade-off. I don't see us having a wrong answer here.
I have to agree. I don't see it as a safety thing anymore as I look at it. I've kind of moved away from it as I look at the length of it. But I kind of go, Brandon, it'd be kind of nice to have a way for kids that may walk through somewhere. And that's why maybe where option one provides a pedestrian pathway might be nice. But the safety thing, I've kind of, I just look at that. There's all sorts of connections for emergency vehicles to get in and out. And if it's not going to be needed for getting the Baileys, because they won't ever need it, because they already have everything there, I don't see the need for a stub road.
Okay. In the interest of moving this along, do we have any other thoughts? Commissioner Arner, you have not shared anything. Commissioner Lunt, I hate to call you on the spot, but I would appreciate your input on a preference.
Well, I've been trying to get up the maps a little better and I've been having trouble with that. So I'm a little spatially off. I mean, I've really been trying to visualize all of this, but I guess I feel like, well, I don't know what, say that it's a 30-70 split. I mean, is it still millions? I just, people will get mad. They think, well, why is the city paying for part of the subdivision? Because things get misconstrued and, but, to move utilities, I don't know. I suppose I would tend to go a little bit more with option 4 and 5 from a more practical point of view, but
so let me, Commissioner Arner, would it help if I asked you, do you prefer a stub road for connectivity purposes? And connectivity is the interconnectivity of the neighborhood as well as safety, or would you prefer?
So you said to the west, you're thinking in another subdivision would go, and is that a bunch of, I don't have the Google Maps, so is that all bunch of big?
I can share this with you real quick, I believe.
I don't even know how to do Google Maps, so on my own computer, otherwise I would try to have that, but I understand the concept of the stub roads. I've had one off my cul-de-sac previously, and people they put trailers. I mean, it's not the worst thing. I don't think they're an eyesore or anything, but.
Commissioners, can I add one more thing? In reality, the discussion surrounding the cost and the sharing of utilities is, in some respects, like I think you identified, Brandon, not really in front of, Vice Chair Mason, is not really a decision for this group. And so I think focusing on that, the lot makeup and the lot design that this group feels is the best, and then let the developer worry about whether that would involve some financial support from the city, and then the city council and him can work through that.
I agree on that point. I think we come in with a good design, and in my opinion, the crux of this issue has to do with, do we need a connectivity road to the west? And if you do get the ability to look at that on Google Earth, you'll see there's a hayfield. What's proposed is a hayfield. There's a hayfield to the west, about approximately the same size. Okay, both of them have Alberta to the north and Lomond View to the south. And given the development in the city, it's very, very feasible that is going to be developed into a subdivision. Given that it's on the general plan to be residential, that's going to happen. So the question is, do you want to see 2 small blocks made out of this development, or do you want to see one big one big block. And there are compelling reasons for both. And we're gonna each have our own opinion on that, and feel free to share them. You know, I don't see a right or wrong answer here. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. I do think we need to be guided by the general plan and by the ordinance of the city. And to that, Commissioner Nancarrow spoke to the general plan recommending the 800 feet limit. However, in our ordinance, we have a 1,300 foot limit. So I see us as having some discretion here. That's my opinion.
Yeah, but it also talks about that if it's over 800 feet, that we should, highly consider some kind of a walkway area, sub road, something. But, when you look at the plat, you say, oh, well, it's only 8 or 9 houses along there. But don't forget, these are very large plots. Remember that we went through, there was already 20, and then I think it's like 12.5 right now. So these are very large, we say, well, it's only 9 lots. Well, they're pretty big lots. So that's a really long road with not providing that future connectivity. So I think we should really consider that.
Brandon, John Hanson has his hand raised again when you're ready to hear from him.
Noted. Let's have some discussion with the commission first, and then we'll return to that. He may have some 6th option that will suddenly sweep in and change everything for us. I don't know. But I do want to have every commissioner's voice heard first. Commissioner Lunt, do you have an opinion on the connectivity road?
Yeah, my personal opinion is that the stub road is unnecessary. I would probably prefer either 1 or 2, and would lean closer to 2. As far as like a trail connection between the two, I don't know exactly how that works either, because is that going to end up just as a dead end trail for years, which would make no sense, or a patch of weeds that's an easement for years? I don't know what that would mean to put a trail through without anything on the other end. And so the number 2 to me makes the most sense. I personally don't see an issue with the length of it, especially considering as you look down this road between Alberta and Lomond View, there's a few connections that are just as long already there. But
thank you. Anybody object if I allow Mr. Hanson to speak again? Mr. Hanson, would you like to address this again?
Yeah, this is John Hanson again. Sure appreciate everyone's comments and insights about, your feelings about this stub road or a trail. I just want to say one thing about, and I'm certainly not, like Brandon said, there's no right or wrong on this, but it's been my experience in 2 subdivisions, one I owned and one I didn't, that sometimes these little stub roads and that becomes the harbor for, activities that aren't that great. The kids can hide behind trailers, and there's one in Pleasant View where they've had a lot of trouble with who fenced both sides of it, and it's kind of a little hideaway for kids. So I don't know. I just think the Planning Commission is the money that you'd have to spend for that. If we put it in the utilities, your utilities are nearly 30 years old, and some of the manholes would be in the back of these yards. And you need to get these utilities out of private property and into the city property. And unfortunately, like the city has a budget, we have a budget, and we're trying to make it work for the city. And we're sticking our neck out, hoping that what we'll create there will attract some very qualified buyers. So that's my feeling about it. I think your moving your utilities are a lot more important than a stub road. You start, we're talking over $100,000 just to move those utilities. Well, that's a burden the city doesn't want to have to pay to rip up people's backyards and that. So I just think number 2 is what we ought to try to work out. That's my speech. Thank you.
Thank you. That's your second speech.
Which one was the best?
I didn't cry. So I will agree with that. the sentiment that having a utility in your backyard is a pain. I have one, and it is a pain. And for that reason, I would like to see those utilities moved to the front. Now, whether that offsets the need for a street, I don't know. Again, that's a discretionary thing.
I really appreciate Mr. Hansen's explanation. That clarified a lot for me. So if you won't say you just have a backyard and they're back in the back, you'd have to have some sort of easement. And if something went wrong, they would basically have to come in and rip up your yard. Is that the correct understanding of that? If they did move the utilities to the front?
It's been my experience that having the utilities in the back of your yard limits some of the things you can do, your ability to plant things, excavate back there, things like that.
Okay.
Maybe a swimming pool or something like that could be affected. Usually it's things like that.
Okay.
I would suggest, Commission, that this isn't necessarily neither or. I mean, let's not be fooled into saying, well, if we have utilities in the back, we can't have a stub road. There's nothing saying we couldn't have both. Okay. Now, I'm personally in favor of option 2. Doesn't mean you have to be, but please don't allow the notion to be there that, oh, we have to have a stub. The trade-off between a stub road and utilities. Obviously, it may not make economic sense from Mr. Hansen, but if it's the right thing to do, it's you need to consider that.
I had another thought too. Just kind of mulling this over. There's still a lot of push about low impact development and trying to reduce and mitigate the amount of asphalt that we're putting in the city. And the stub road becomes another patch of asphalt that has to be, that's drained. And we've seen these, John's talked about it. And I think we're all aware of these little stub roads, set of stub roads for years and years and years. And sometimes they get connected. I know of one when we did, now I just lost the one that had sat as a stub road for a long time. And it was actually right next to Councilman Turner's house, and he lost his trailer parking lot when they finally did that one, pushed that one through.
And his sand pile and his trampoline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I would rather see longer blocks and less asphalt, and have, we've got 60 feet less of asphalt. That's the depth of these yards, and that will be landscaped or, privately taken care of, rather than pushing more stuff for the city to maintain. And it does, as Mr. Hansen said, it now takes this utility and negates this one going through this backyard and puts it down in the middle of the road, where our city maintenance people really prefer to have all of these things. So yeah, I would heavily lean towards option 2 as well.
But one thing Brandon didn't mention, if the utilities in the backyard of that easement, also it affects your placement if you want to put a storage shed in or something like that, because you wouldn't be able to put it on that easement over top of those utilities.
No, you can't put any permanent structure on it. And I think there's some responsibility for the city to go back through and revegetate and, rehabilitate it after they tear it up. So that is added expense to the city when they're working with utility easements.
Yeah, so our discussion kind of pushes it towards option 2.
I agree.
It sounds like the majority of the council is favoring option 2. We may not be unanimous on this. I would enter. Mr. Scott is raising his hand, or was that okay?
I'm raising my hand.
Okay.
Just to indicate that a sub option of every one of these options is to ensure that there be a pedestrian walkway. So even with option 2, and it doesn't necessarily have to be between, especially if you're moving those utilities, lots 14 and 15, it could be shifted to one of the other lots within that center section there. So potentially you could do option 2 and still require some sort of a pedestrian walkway.
Well, we could put that into a motion then, option 2 with a walkway.
Correct.
My concern there, council, would be similar to what Commissioner Lunt expressed, where would this walkway go? If we have a walkway, it's gonna come right down the side of two people's yards, which is okay. I mean, they can build fences and whatever, but where would that go? What would the neighboring future development have any obligation to connect that trail?
Yes, they would.
Is that something we need to worry about tonight, where that would go, or just put that as one in our options?
I think that you don't necessarily have to identify the location, that you could request the applicant to go back and take a look at where the most ideal location would be, and they could come back with some options relative to that as part of their final approval.
What if a walkway went just to the north of the detention pond? I mean, I realize that people in general, walkways are good for neighbors, but not necessarily for the homeowners that abut them. I wonder if that could be minimized by having a walkway next to the retention pond.
Brandon, I have another hand up. Mayor Berube would like to speak.
Okay, I'll allow it.
Hey, thanks for that. Thanks for that special permission, Brandon. I appreciate it. I just want to make a comment that the city is surely willing to entertain option 2 with participation, but I don't think any approval should be conditional upon that. If that's the right way to do things, then it's the right way to do things. So I would hope that any approval is not based upon condition of the city participation. We will surely entertain that at City Council, but I'm not sure it should be conditional upon the city's participation. Once again, if it's the right option, it's the right option.
Thank you, Mayor. I share that sentiment. I think our purpose here is to identify the right layout that's best for the community and let the City Council worry about the economics.
Commissioner Mason, one thing to note too is the lot 19 under option 2 is not the detention basin. It's just a lot. So, but my question maybe for Rob or whoever is how does that work though? If we required the pedestrian pathway, does that just sit and remain as an easement that somebody incorporates into their yard until it's built, or does it get built and sit there as a dead end trail? What happens?
Well, you've got a couple options, but typically you don't want to have something that's going to be in the future. People get used to it, and then all of a sudden they're surprised with, oh my gosh, what are you doing to me? It's better to go ahead and construct it up front, and then people are aware of it.
Okay, I'd be a little reluctant, I think, still to require that. I think of, this is basically a stub trail. And I mean, the stub road that we had near my house was a stub road for 30 years until it was just recently built through. And so I don't anticipate it would be that long in this case, but it seems like that would be a weird little spot for things to happen. But
Okay. I think we've had quite a bit of discussion on this. I would entertain a motion for something we could work towards.
I could make a motion, but I don't think it would pass. So
It doesn't stop that. That doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do, Commissioner Nick Carroll.
no, it's okay. I think I could go with whatever. I'm not sure feel that strongly about it, but I understand where the city staff is coming from with their preferred options. So.
We'll listen to you.
No, go ahead. I'll wait for somebody to do option 2 because I know that's what you guys want.
But what I see here is what I think the commission is looking for here is some version of version 2 that incorporates the staff recommendations as laid out in the report, and then the pedestrian walkway is probably the coin toss there.
Well,
But
Brent,
other than that, I don't see anything that we've discussed that we wouldn't accept the other recommendations of the staff.
I'll give it a shot as I don't get beat up too bad at the end. Okay, I make a motion, we do a preliminary approval of the Pheasant Land subdivision and the conditions found in the staff report, and referring with a strong option for option 2 of a possible trail.
And would you like to accept the conditions in the staff report?
Oh yes, the conditions in the staff report.
We have a motion from Commissioner Barker. Does anyone second his motion? Commissioner Arner, I see your lips moving, but I don't hear anything.
Sorry, I was on mute. I would like to second that, but and I'm not sure I'm saying this correctly or technically, but if Commissioner Barker mentioned a possible pedestrian walkway, I think we would like them to bring some options to the table for having one for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I could make that change and be good with it. That's a better wording.
So our motion is to grant preliminary approval, conditions as noted in the staff report, with some exploration of a pedestrian walkway by the applicant.
That's correct.
I think we need to make a add to that whether we're recommending option 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5.
I thought he said number 2 in his.
Yeah,
I said
Okay.
number.
Is there any further discussion? I'm going to call for a vote. Commissioner Waite.
Yes.
Commissioner Barker.
Yes.
Commissioner Arner.
Yes.
Commissioner Nancaro.
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion
How about
passes. I did notice that Mr. Hanson had his hand up.
Do I get to vote, Brandon?
Oh, I skipped you. Commissioner Lund, how would you vote?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Pretty much semantics at this point. Okay. The motion passes unanimously now. Thank you. Will bring us on to item 8 in our agenda. Is everyone doing okay? Do we need a break? It is 8 o'clock. Is everyone okay to plow through another one? Sounds like okay. Okay, commission item number 8 is consideration or action regarding final approval for Mountain Valley Vistas Phase 1, and that is again presented by Rob Scott. Mr. Scott?
I'll unmute here. Commissioners and audience, this particular project has gone through a couple iterations with respect to zone changes and so forth. It is currently zoned R18 for the majority of the property. It has some unique circumstances that are unfolding as this development is coming forward. There's a property owner that owns property, Mr. Webb, along 2600 that is participating in this project. His property is zoned RE20. He has submitted a rezone application for his property, and that will be a requirement, as you'll see in just a minute here. So back in, let's see, August of 2018, their preliminary approval was granted for the overall project. And the applicant has divided the project into multiple phases. A minor subdivision was approved here in March with 3 lots along 850 East. So this is the next phase of the project, and this one, that initial one was 34 lots. This phase is a 10-lot subdivision located at approximately 800 East, 2600 North. The future Monroe Boulevard is a part of this project and it bisects the subdivision. The property to the north is the Warren Estates Phase 2 subdivision, and that plays a part in this project as well. The subdivision phase is located on approximately 3.2 acres. And again, it's in the R18 and RE20 zones. The R18 zone requires a minimum lot size of 8,000 square feet for interior lots, 9,000 square feet for corner lots, with a minimum width of 80 feet. And I make note of that a rezone is going to be required prior to recording this plat. The subdivision includes a portion of the Johnson Webb property. As I mentioned, he submitted applications for both a rezone and also he is further subdividing his properties as well. And that will be in its own subdivision as far as his property. It's necessary for his property to go forward because on the north side of his property is the extension of, I've forgotten the road name, the road number. Is it 2625 North? That will extend from this project going east across the Webb property and then north to the future phases of Mountain Valley Villas. So hopefully that's not too confusing. Technical Review Committee meeting was held on this property. City engineer has submitted a report. The geotechnical report and secondary water and will serve letter has been received for the subdivision. The proposed lots meet the lot width requirements and square footage requirements. Additionally, the applicant has provided bearings and angles of all side lot boundaries. And again, we'll be requesting verification of these things before we get to final. The proposed lots have been and indicates verified to meet the lot width requirements and square footage requirements. The street right-of-way width is shown as 48 feet, not the standard 60 feet as a result of meeting the low impact design standards. The Monroe Boulevard section is eligible for a payback of the center portion of the right-of-way difference between 66 feet and the 80 feet. So the proposed subdivision, we believe, meets the intent of the general plan. It is identified as low density residential. It's within the Old Town neighborhood. So summary of requirements: comply with staff report, comply with the engineer report requirements. The Warren Estates Phase 2 lot, gee, I didn't mention that, sorry. Let me go back to that. The Warren Estates Phase 2 subdivision lot 8 is being amended to transfer a 30-foot by 4 to 6 foot parcel into lot 10 of this subdivision in order for lot 10 to meet the frontage requirements. And this is going to require an amended plat for the Warren Estates Phase 2 subdivision to accomplish that transfer. Sorry. So the third thing on this list is the Warren Estates Phase 2 lot amendment. Needs to be approved prior to recording. That would be a minor amendment and a staff approval. Johnson Webb will need to be a signatory to this plat. Gosh, sorry. Johnson Webb properties to be rezoned prior to recording, and also his properties to be approved as a subdivision. In terms of summary of issues, does the subdivision meet the requirements of the applicable city subdivision and zoning ordinances, and is the proposed subdivision consistent with the North Ogden City General Plan? Staff recommends final approval of the Mountain Valley Villas subdivision, Phase 1, subject to the conditions in the staff report, which are the ones that I just read. So I'll drink some water and answer any of your questions.
Rob, while you take that sip, as I look at page 152 of your document, I don't see any of those properties say Johnson Webb, and I happen to know where Johnson Webb lives, but there's other names on there. Is that just need an update? Is that an oversight?
I
don't know if you have a chance to see that.
Maybe you can just scroll up, Lynn. So, whoop, don't go too far. So, if you'll take your pointer and go to the right, go down, right off 2600 North, the next parcel over, left, yep. That parcel is Johnson Webb's. And then there's another property that's just to the west of that one that fronts on 2600. And then he owns the next parcel over. That one. And part of the back side of his main parcel is included within this subdivision in the design. So that's the reason why his property, he has to be a signatory to the dedication part of the plat, because part of his property is actually being included in the subdivision.
And there wasn't enough property for the road without his approval and participation. Is that correct?
Well, it isn't necessarily a matter of that. It's a matter of being the cooperation between the developer, Pat Burns, and Johnson Webb. They've worked together to come up with a design solution that meets both of their needs.
Okay.
I recall from an earlier, this has come before us a few other times, and Mr. Webb was initially reluctant to this. Then he spoke at the last meeting. I don't know if he's here to speak or not for himself, but he was, he spoke in favor of a similar design months and months ago. As I recall, I don't want to put words in his mouth. It seemed like he was in agreement with this. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Scott about his presentation? Okay, I would ask for any other public input on this item. Please speak now.
I want Pat Burns to speak first.
Oh, thank you. Do we want to hear from the applicant, Mr. Burns? Sorry, I forgot you there.
He doesn't have his hand up.
Do we have any questions for the applicant? Does anybody have any questions for the applicant specifically?
It looks like his mic is muted. It just unmuted, actually.
Pat, would you like anything?
I don't think so. I think Rob did a great job of explaining everything. I will gladly explain anything if there is any questions. But I think it was pretty well described. And yeah, Johnson Webb definitely was a part of this. And I believe I could say he's excited to get this going. And we've got some pretty good ideas to work out together. But subdivision has been at work. So I know you guys have seen this a few times. And I've been working on this for good grief quite a while. But now it's finally coming together. Pretty excited. I think it'll be a good project. And I've got to know a lot of the neighbors around. And they're all really on board with it and pretty happy. So it's kind of come full circle for my first submittal. So pretty good, but it's just taken a little while, but it's been great.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. Any other members of the public that choose to speak on this? Okay, and light of that, or is there any further discussion by the council on this, or by the commission on this? Any discussion at all? In my opinion, this looks like, I don't have any specific concerns about it. This is a number of times we've seen this. And I can't see anything that would be a stumbling block there myself. In the absence of any further discussion, I'd entertain a motion for this.
I'll make a motion that we grant final approval to the Mountain Valley Villas subdivision phase 1, subject to conditions in the staff report.
I second.
Thank you, Commissioners Nancaro and Arner. Any further discussion on this before a vote? Okay, we're going to start with Commissioner Arner. How would you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Nancaro.
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt, I did not forget you.
Yes.
Commissioner Waite,
Yes.
Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
and I vote yes. The motion passes. Granted final approval. Okay, I'll ask again if anyone needs a short break. If not, we can plow ahead. Does anybody need any time? Okay, speak now. Otherwise, we'll move on to item number 9, which brings us into our legislative portion of the meeting, which is a public hearing, consideration, and recommendation regarding an amending the city code to create a civic zone. And we'll turn the time over to Mr. Rob Scott to present that item.
Thank you, commissioners. Getting some things here ready for my notes. So commissioners, this is a public hearing to consider enacting a civic zone for North Ogden City. This is a legislative matter, and as such, the Planning Commission is acting as a recommending body to the City Council. The city has wide discretion in taking legislative action, and examples of legislative action includes general plan, zoning map, land use text amendments, which this one is. Legislative actions require that the Planning Commission give a recommendation to the City Council, and typically the criteria for making a decision related to a legislative matter require compatibility with the general plan and the existing codes. So the initial discussion on this particular opportunity was first discussed back in December on the 4th. And in 2019, there was a discussion with the Planning Commission. Since that time, the planning staff has consulted with other the other departments in the city, since they are the stewards of other public properties. So we've included discussions, particularly with Public Works and the Parks Department. We came back on April 15th and held a further discussion with you, and clarification was made that this zone assures that the city-owned facilities will follow city ordinances. And I think that's a key part of what has been a concern relative to this particular amendment. On May 6th, the Planning Commission further considered the draft, requested that a public hearing be set. So I'm going to give you a summary of what's included within this particular amendment.
You're watching a live webcast for our 8th Starlink mission and our 9th mission this year. Today, we've launched over 420 Starlink satellites to orbit. As a reminder, Starlink is
whoever's watching the news, please mute yourself and pay attention to the meeting, please.
So the following summary was given to you as an amendment summary. So there's a definition of open space that includes the inclusion of trails, walking paths, and plazas to be included as a part of the definition for open space. Also, the establishment of zones we list all of those, and the provision adds the civic, and we've done the CZ to the list of established zones. So that is part of the list of zones that are included within our within our ordinance. So the added language, there's a purpose and intent section. We've identified permitted uses, identifying accessory buildings, cemeteries, civic buildings, civic complexes, public parks, and public utility substations. In terms of site development standards, the minimum standards provide that the Planning Commission is given the authority to modify these standards if there are unique circumstances, while ensuring there are appropriate buffering provisions with adjacent uses. It requires that there be a site plan approval, and the site plan approval standards are requirement for the civic zone for properties to be able to be improved. So that's our site plan process that's in chapter 26. Site plan amendments, a standard for amending the site plan is provided. Regulations regarding site sign regulations, fence regulations, exterior lighting, trash enclosures, a parking requirement. And I wanted to spend a little time talking about this one. A parking requirement is established for parks and other civic uses. And the way we've established that is that there's a national standard for parks and the number of stalls that are required. So we would consider that national standard as part of the identification of the required parking for parks. Otherwise, the parking standard is one that relates to, if it happens to be a civic complex, then it would be office standard for parking. Public utility substations, we've made some adjustments to those standards, and there are references that are added referencing civic uses in the existing provisions for development plans. And I wanted to go back and pay a little bit more attention to the site development standards as it relates to open space. So we did a survey of various civic uses and what have you. And so under E, we've come up with a standard that anything that had a civic complex, so similar to commercial offices and what have you, we require a minimum of 20%. Public parks, we're requiring a minimum of 50%, or is approved by the Planning Commission. So again, each of these specific uses has unique characteristics that are associated with them. I know this Planning Commission is very concerned about making sure that there are appropriate considerations for adjoining properties. So we've tried to identify specific standards that are going to address all of those items that we typically review as part of a site plan, and at the same time recognize that there are some unique characteristics for the civic uses within our city. So another thing that I wanted to point out in our general plan is that the general plan actually identifies civic uses as on our land use projection for all of our maps and what have you. So we currently have a institutional civic designation for various city-owned properties that are already on our map. So again, this particular this particular amendment is consistent with that, with those designations. Last but not least, the summary of considerations for you tonight. What approval process and design standards should apply to civic uses? And is the amendment consistent with the general plan? Our recommendation is go ahead and conduct a public hearing regarding the civic zone and make a recommendation to the city council. And we believe that the Planning Commission can find that the amendment is consistent with the general plan. So with that, I'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Do we have any questions about the presentation or questions specific to Mr. Scott? I think we've hashed this around a little bit and we've discussed this. We have had some public input already. Do we have any questions before we open the public hearing? I would entertain a motion to hear from the public in a public hearing about this.
Brandon, I don't see any hands raised.
Well, we haven't opened the public hearing yet formally.
Oh,
I make a motion, we open the public hearing.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Okay. For the motion to second to open the public hearing, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Public hearing is now open. Now do we have any hands raised?
still no hands.
Okay. We'll give them a moment. Looks like we have 3 members of the public in attendance. Okay. Given that no one has come forward to speak, we want to entertain a motion to close the public hearing?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing.
I'll second it.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Any discussion towards this? My thoughts on this are we have hashed this around. Mayor spoke at the last meeting where we met about this, and he didn't want to make this zone be some kind of an advantageous situation where the city could sneak in something that the general public is not allowed to do. I don't see that in here. I see this as just being a land use that is different from residential, commercial, industrial, those type of things, because it is. It's parks, it's schools, it's things like that. I'm very much in favor of it myself. Any other thoughts?
I just want to make a comment. I wish this civic zone existed back about 21 years ago when the city bought Barker Park, both where the amphitheater sits and the other part. It would have resolved a lot of conflicts, a lot of issues wouldn't have come up. And I think things would have run smooth because the city would have been forced to be a lot more transparent as it went along.
Agreed, Commissioner Barker. I think this gives some standards for future legislative bodies to follow and future city staff to follow.
I agree.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons I support it so wholeheartedly. And there may be different opinions out there. Do we have any further discussion?
I think we've discussed this pretty good in the past. So, yes, I'll make a motion that we forward a positive recommendation to the city council to approve the civic zone as the ordinance is written by staff.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second for positive recommendation to the city council. Any further discussion before a vote? Okay. Commissioner Barker, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Waite?
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt?
Yes.
Commissioner Nancarrow?
Yes.
Commissioner Arner?
Yes.
And I vote yes. And that will be passed on to the city council. Brings us moving along to item 10. I'll ask again if anyone needs a break. We're good to plow on? Okay, item 10 is discussion regarding revising the standards for block length, ironically enough, and connectivity by Mr. Scott.
Thanks, Chair and Commission. This is our initial discussion about this particular topic. As I indicated in our earlier discussion, we need to identify some additional clarity with respect to when we do not require these types of connectivity options. You'll recall earlier, within the last 6 months, we adopted the Complete Streets policy, and that this is consistent with that as well. But I just wanted you to be aware that staff feels like that we need to have a clear and objective standard regarding when we shouldn't be requiring these kinds of connections. So I've got some proposed language that I think that we should consider. It's not before you in the memo or what have you. I will be, I can share that with you just briefly. I've looked at the Ogden City ordinance, which is very similar to ours. It says blocks shall not exceed 1,300 feet. So ours is 1,320. Blocks over 800 feet in length shall be provided with a dedicated walkway through the block at its approximate center. Such walkway shall be not less than 10 feet wide. The width of blocks generally shall be sufficient to allow 2 tiers of lots. So I still feel like that there should be an option for the Planning Commission to not only consider requirement for a walkway, but also for a stub street as well. So we'll be coming up with some additional language that will give you some options relative to that. The second thing is, some of you were on the Planning Commission when we had, what's the subdivision? The one that's right to the west of you, Commissioner Nancaro.
Paramount Estates.
Yes, Paramount Estates
and Oakmont Estates.
And Oakmont, yes. Seems like we had a discussion about connectivity on that one as well. And one of the things that we talked about was that there's one of our city trails that lacked access from that subdivision. So I'm thinking that as part of this amendment, we should do something similar as well with this standard. So the language that I've come up with, and that's very tentative, when a proposed subdivision is adjacent to a designated trail and there is no roadway access to the trail within, and I don't know what the number of feet, but I'll throw out a number, 500 feet, the Planning Commission may require that a dedicated walkway be connected to the trail in a location that is approximate center in the approximate center location. So there we go. Those are the two things. We'll be coming back to you with some more refined language, but I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about this. Let me just talk a little bit about safety for a second. Safety, when I think of it, it refers to access from our public safety people. From our police department, from our fire folks as well. When the reason that these things can be problematic is when you have long blocks and you end up with a situation where there is a severe accident and there's no access on one point, then potentially you have to drive clear around to get to the incident that is needed to be addressed. So that's another significant aspect of this safety situation where we really need to pay some attention to that. Years ago when I was working in Medford, Oregon, we had a planning commissioner that, this is a severe example, but he lived in Berkeley, California. This happened to be probably 30 years ago. There was basically one way in, one way out for some subdivisions there. And what took place was that there was a severe fire and people lost their lives because of that situation. So safety is a legitimate discussion. I don't want to overly excite people about those things, but that's what we try to do as planners, is try to look to the future, look to providing appropriate standards that really get at safety, which is our #1 concern when it comes to these standards. So kind of rambled on here, but the thought is that we would bring back some refined language for you to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. So my two thoughts as you were speaking there were, one is I felt like our current standards aren't adequate. You know, we had differing opinions on block length just this evening, right? Commissioner Nancaro stated that the general plan says that when a block length is in excess of 800 or 850 feet, then it is recommended, and that's just kind of weak. You know, it leaves up to too much discretion. So I support something like this. My other thought was that when you started talking about safety, I was reminded of that situation just a few years ago where there was the fire in Uinta, and those homes up at the mouth of Weaver Canyon were affected. And if you look at that, there's some big long cul-de-sacs up there that just terminate, and that mountain started on fire, and there were people who had a legitimate, could have legitimately lost their lives. Now, I don't think anyone was affected that way, but that was a scary situation from some design, which was really cool, you know, when you're up in scrub oak like that, but really unsafe, we kind of learned. So, so I think I support myself. I think I support you coming back with some recommendations. I don't know if the commission has any thoughts on what those recommendations should be or anything like that.
I know Mr. Scott got my attention when he talked about Oakmont Estates, and I still remember that, and I will still continue to remember that developer who I feel like did a bait and switch on us, because they promised that connection into that trail in the preliminary phase. When they came back for final, they said there's nowhere in the ordinance that says they have to do that, and they're not going to do it because it will cost them money.
And the only cost was a rebuke from a retired military commander, which was pretty epic at the time, Commissioner Nancaro, I thought. But at the end of the day, they took their licks and left, and laughed all the way to the bank.
So yeah, I would really be in favor of strengthening that as well. I think, you know, having dead ends and long cul-de-sacs, I think that's an extremely dangerous position. One tonight, I felt like, yeah, it was kind of toward the end of the acceptable length, but it was still okay with access from both ends of the road. Now, if somebody had to get from lot 14 to lot 15 and the road was blocked in between, it would be a heck of a long way. You have to go clear back to Washington to get to it. I don't know how that factors into everything, because even if we were on that one, if we had required the stub road, it still wouldn't have taken care of that, because that's so far that, you know, could potentially so far down the road before anything happens there.
Well, we remember just not a few months ago, we did have the Dr. Mackley who wanted to have a longer cul-de-sac. And I know that's not quite exactly what we're talking about here, but the principal, when he brought that lawyer in, he was saying, well, there's nothing magical between 800 feet and 1,200 feet. That was essentially his argument, right? Was that it's just a measurement, and who's to say that 800 is less safe than 1,200 or whatever those numbers were. I know we were talking cul-de-sac lengths there. So we're going to have to be prepared to have some evidence, probably, you know, and have a standard and stick to that standard. Otherwise, someone will just come in like that and propose a change to our standard when it could fits their specific needs or wants, and you know, and move those. So I would just encourage that we have some, when those recommendations come back, they come back with some, and I'm sure they will, because they always do, but you know, with some guidance that this is the national standard and this is set out by the firemen or whomever sets those things.
You know, I think it just goes to show, like, our discussion tonight is, you know, I think we all have different views on the importance of that connectivity, whether it's for safety or just, you know, opening the streets up between the neighborhoods. It seems like we're not really all united, and we each time it comes up, whether it was the Mackley property or this, this one tonight, or, it seems like we have a long discussion about it and we may not all really be in agreement of which way to go, but because the language is, we may require it. It's kind of squishy, it leaves a lot of interpretation, where if it was just, a standard in an ordinance that said, here's, if it's longer than 800 feet, then it needs to have, some kind of a break there for access. The problem is each one of these scenarios is unique, where whatever the situation was, but because it gets squishy like that, then the developer or the property owner, can really just say, well, it's not really in the ordinance. The Mackley property, for an example, if I recall, what they decided to do is start building a house right in the middle of where that sub street was supposed to go through. And so it's sort of, thinking it would take our options away from us because they put the footings of the house down where the substreet would go. So I think if we do have stronger language where it's very specific and it's one way or the other, it's not, it's not up to interpretation, then it's going to make it a lot easier for all of us. But the thing is, it's going to be hard to stick to it.
Do we like the clause, because I did, do we like the clause where if the property abuts an existing trail system? I thought that was great. I applaud staff for that one. Agree, disagree?
Yeah, I like that.
Thank you.
I agree.
Rob, does that kind of give you what you're looking for there? You're muted.
Yes, thank you. We'll bring something back.
So just one comment real quick. One thing to consider on the language on this last clause or provision C, where it says blocks that are longer than 800 feet, the Planning Commission may require pedestrians ways or crosswalks. It says through the center. It might be helpful to state, if the Planning Commission's in support of that provision, in the middle third of the block. That gives flexibility in design to put it, between different lots and still have a set parameter where it's outside of it, but some flexibility within that middle third so that it works for the developers and still allows a trail or pedestrian way through it.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It kind of will also account for the uniqueness of each property, to have that have some flexibility but still be within our strict standards.
Yeah, it gives them the opportunity to do what makes the most sense for that property, rather than going to some blindly crafted ordinance.
Hopefully none of our ordinances are blindly crafted, but
well, we try not to.
Do try.
We give it our best shot.
That's true.
Okay, does that give staff some marching orders? Not really. We kind of just nodded and think that's a good idea, but is that sufficient for you guys?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, brings us to item 11, which would be remarks from planning commissioners. Anybody have anything for us? No?
I just have a question. Does staff know how much longer we're going to keep doing these Zoom meetings? I really don't like them.
This is John. The council hasn't given any direction yet on which way they want to go, but I do know that it's not particularly the issue with having the planning commission. It's the room. It's when there's a hot topic that people are interested in. We can only fit 30 people in the council room with social distancing. And so it's just trying to make sure that we're not excluding people. And that's kind of what we're waiting for, I think, is more direction from the state on increasing the number of people who can gather together.
Okay.
A question, Brent or John, if during these summer months, if we couldn't have some outside with a PA.
We could look into, I know the council wants to talk about this issue, so I will mention that to them. The idea of having a PA system or something as well.
If it's more expensive, then I'm not advocating that. I'm just throwing mud on the wall, you know. I mean, it's just an idea. But, you know, while the weather's nice and it's still light, we could even have it under a Bowery or something outside.
I just feel like with the Zoom meetings, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in meetings that we're not seeing. As much as you don't like saying it, seeing body language, facial expression, there's a lot of stuff where you can read a lot more into what's going on with the people, with the applicants, with everything going on. And I don't know why we couldn't do a dual path meeting where, you know, have Zoom participants and then the planning commission or even city council when they meet. So they would be gathered together, but still connected through Zoom to the rest of the community.
Lynn, your job just became more high tech.
No kidding.
Yeah, keep all of that under control.
Good question, Commissioner White. Any other discussion? Okay, John, as our let's see, our city planner, that's Rob Scott.
I wanted to share with you that the General Plan Steering Committee has been looking at what would be the appropriate standards, and there's a couple of commissioners that are on that committee as well, relative to our downtown, Southtown area. So I've been tasked with, because Lynn wouldn't do it, creating a syllabus for potential discussion about options. And we divided the discussion into what uses should be included within the geographic area for downtown and Southtown. We've also been starting to look at design standards as well. So I just want you to be aware of that. When I get the syllabus ready to send out to the General Plan Steering Committee, I'm going to make sure that you as planning commissioners also get that as well. I want you to make sure that you're in the loop with respect to that.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any remarks from our city manager and attorney?
No, just thanks for participating in that conversation last night. I thought that was very helpful. And then also, you know, those of you who have assignments on other committees, we appreciate you participating in those and providing that insight, as well as being willing to pass that information back on to this commission as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was, you know, I get the vibe a little bit, and I'm glad the mayor's listening to this a little bit, that it sometimes doesn't really, when we pass along a yes/no decision, it may appear that there was a wholehearted, you know, we were wholeheartedly in favor of it, when we may have spent 2 hours deliberating on something and really stewed on it, but eventually something swayed us to vote yes. And that's where I was on that issue last night. But yet that got passed on to the city council as, again, the mayor made note of this, that, hey, it was unanimous by the planning commission in favor and unanimous by the city council as opposed. And I don't feel just like the vote itself was representative of actually, you know, the complexity of it and that. So, and I know that the minutes get passed along. I just don't think that the city council has time to review them all. I know even when I'm asked to review the minutes for the meeting prior, sometimes I'm scrambling just a few minutes before the meeting to read all that, and they're lengthy, right? So it's kind of an unfortunate nature of the beast, but I don't have a better recommendation for anything better. So I'll just state that. Okay. Are we prepared to adjourn? I'm entertaining the best motion of the night.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Were there any opposed? Thanks all. See ya.
Have a good night.